Ray Liotta made menace feel intimate. When he was on screen, you didn't just watch, you leaned back. Gene Hackman spent decades proving that the most dangerous man in any room is the one who looks completely ordinary. Craft without vanity. That was his signature. Bob Marley left behind music that still moves policy debates, not just playlists. Whitney Houston's voice was a technical marvel, but what she actually did was make millions of people feel personally witnessed. That is a rarer gift than range. Lisa Marie Presley carried an impossible name and tried, genuinely, to build something of her own inside it. Norm Macdonald understood that the best joke is the one that makes you feel slightly uncertain about whether you should be laughing. Nobody worked that edge better. Here is a man who, by any honest measure, has already won. The records are public, the credits are real, the influence is documented, and yet Samuel L. Jackson still shows up to work. That tension between a legacy that is already sealed in the popular imagination and a career that refuses to close is exactly where his story gets interesting. By the mid-2000s, industry analysts were tracking something that had never quite happened before in Hollywood. One actor's name had appeared in films that collectively crossed $10 billion at the global box office, then $12 billion, then 14. The number climbed past $20 billion, a figure that, adjusted for inflation or left raw, has no real precedent for a single performer. No studio manufactured that. No franchise machine alone explained it. Samuel L. Jackson had made individual choices, film by film, role by role, across a span of decades, and the cumulative weight of those choices became a kind of economic and cultural fact. But the number, as staggering as it is the wrong place to start understanding what he actually changed. What he changed was the vocabulary of American screen presence. Before Jackson's specific version of intensity entered the mainstream, the dominant mode for black leading men in Hollywood, and this is documented in critical writing from the period, operated under a persistent pressure toward palatability, toward a certain smoothness, toward reassurance. Sidney Poitier had navigated that pressure with extraordinary grace and genuine genius, and the actors who followed in the decades after carried versions of the same negotiation. Jackson refused the negotiation, not with anger, not with a manifesto, but with performance choices that were simply too specific, too alive, too dangerously present to be softened. The tool he used was the role of Jules Winnfield in Pulp Fiction, released in 1994. This is where the modern understanding of what Samuel L. Jackson is begins, even though the man himself had been working at a professional level for over 15 years by that point. Quentin Tarantino wrote Jules partially with Jackson in mind after seeing him in Jungle Fever, and what the two of them built together in that role became one of the most quoted, analyzed, and imitated performances in American cinema. The Ezekiel monologue. The particular stillness before violence. The moral reckoning at the end of the film. Jackson did not play Jules as a symbol or a type. He played him as a man with an interior life that the camera couldn't fully contain, and that overflow of interiority is precisely what made the performance land so hard. He was nominated for an Academy Award for Supporting Actor. He did not win, losing to Martin Landau for Ed Wood. Film scholars and critics have revisited that outcome many times in the years since. Whatever the Academy decided, the culture decided differently. Jules Winnfield entered the permanent record of iconic screen characters, and Jackson's performance became a reference point that working actors explicitly cite when discussing how to command a scene. The industry implications were real and measurable. After Pulp Fiction, the kinds of roles Jackson was offered and the kinds of roles he pursued both shifted. He moved through a remarkable range. The reluctant hitman, the righteous authority figure, the morally compromised survivor, the barely contained force of nature. And in each category, he demonstrated a technique that younger actors and directors have openly described as instructive. Directors like Ryan Coogler, Jordan Peele, and Spike Lee, who gave Jackson some of his earliest significant work, have all spoken publicly about the specificity Jackson brings to character, the refusal to generalize, the insistence on finding the exact human frequency of a person rather than the representative note. Spike Lee's role in Jackson's trajectory cannot be overstated. It was Lee who cast Jackson in School Days in 1988, and then gave him the role of Gator Purify in Jungle Fever in 1991. The crack-addicted brother, whose scenes were so raw and specific that they functioned almost as a separate short film embedded inside a larger one. Jackson won the first ever Cannes Film Festival Award for Best Supporting Performance for that role. It was a signal, early, that what Jackson was doing technically was being recognized at the highest levels of international film criticism. The award was not a consolation. It was a verdict. What followed Pulp Fiction was not a period of coasting on reputation. It was a period of volume and range that becomes almost impossible to track without a spreadsheet. Die Hard with a Vengeance, Jackie Brown, The Long Kiss Goodnight, A Time to Kill. That last film representing a different kind of achievement entirely. In A Time to Kill, Jackson played Carl Lee Haley, a black father in Mississippi who kills the men who brutalized his daughter and then stands trial in a courtroom drama that forces the audience to confront the machinery of American justice. The performance was built on restraint rather than explosion, which made the moments of rupture devastating. The film grossed over $150 million worldwide, at a time when that figure mattered enormously for a drama that was not a blockbuster franchise property. Then came the Marvel decision. And this is where the story takes a turn that separates Jackson from almost every other actor of his generation. In 2008, after the credits of Iron Man rolled, Nick Fury appeared on screen, played by Samuel L. Jackson, and offered Tony Stark membership in the Avengers Initiative. It was a post-credits scene. It ran under 2 minutes, and it launched one of the most consequential casting relationships in the history of modern blockbuster cinema. The Nick Fury character in the Marvel Comics had been reimagined as a figure explicitly based on Samuel L. Jackson years earlier. Artist Brian Hitch had redesigned Fury in the Ultimate series with Jackson's likeness. And so when Marvel Studios went to build their cinematic universe, the casting was less a creative leap than an acknowledgement of what had already happened on the page. What Jackson did with that acknowledgement was methodical. He signed a deal to appear in Marvel's Cinematic Universe films, eventually appearing in more MCU installments than almost any other cast member outside of the core Avengers. Nick Fury became the connective tissue of an entire cinematic universe. the presence that made the individual films feel like chapters in a larger book. And Jackson played the role with the same technique he had always used, finding the specific human weight inside the genre architecture, refusing to let fury become a symbol when he could be a person. The Marvel commitment ran parallel to an ongoing engagement with prestige, independent work that many blockbuster stars allow to atrophy. Jackson appeared in Django Unchained in 2012, playing Stephen, a house slave of such calculated self-preservation and moral corruption that the performance was genuinely disturbing. Tarantino and Jackson working together again, and working in territory that was historically charged and critically contested. Jackson leaned into the discomfort. The performance earned renewed critical attention and demonstrated something that his career had been proving for 30 years, that he could move between registers, the billion-dollar franchise and the provocation, without his credibility bleeding in either direction. The Hateful Eight, in 2015, brought the collaboration with Tarantino to another pitch. Jackson's Major Marquis Warren carries the film as a study in survival, calculation, and the specific violence of American race relations in the post-Civil War period. The film was shot on 70mm Ultra Panavision, an ultra-widescreen format that hadn't been used in decades, and Jackson's face in that format becomes an argument about presence. Some actors photograph. Jackson occupies the frame. There is a difference, and cinematographers have made that distinction explicitly. Beyond the performances themselves, Jackson's public presence has carried a different kind of cultural weight. He has been a visible advocate, a candid voice in cultural debates, and a figure whose interview style, direct, specific, resistant to the management of image that usually governs celebrity speech, has created a version of authenticity that is rare at his level of fame. He has spoken about his history with addiction, about his path to sobriety, about what was lost in the years of struggle and what was found on the other side. Not as confession, not as brand strategy, but as the kind of plain-spoken, factual honesty that audiences recognize as real. He got sober in 1991, on the eve of the breakthrough that would define his career. That timing matters. Almost everything he has built, the records, the range, the longevity, the trust that directors extend to him when they put the weight of a film on his presence, came from the decades after he made that decision. When actors in recovery talk publicly about the cost of addiction and the possibility of what comes after, Jackson's arc is one of the documented examples they can point to. Not hypothetically, concretely. His Howard University years, where he first encountered acting through a political and cultural framework during one of the most charged periods in American civic history, gave him a foundation that was never purely about technique. He had held members of the University Board of Trustees hostage during a demonstration in 1969, demanding curriculum reform and black representation in the administration. The university suspended him. Martin Luther King Sr. personally interceded on his behalf. He returned, graduated, and carried out of Howard an understanding of performance as a form of political engagement that has never entirely left his work. That early experience inflected how he thought about roles, about what it meant to take up space on screen, about the difference between visibility and representation. It did not make him a polemicist. It made him specific. Every character he has played carries the weight of a man who understands what it costs to be seen and has decided to control the terms of that visibility. At this point in his career, Jackson is working on projects across film and television, continuing his MCU involvement through the Disney Plus series Secret Invasion and its aftermath, and expanding what Nick Fury means in a different storytelling format. He is producing work. He is lending his voice, literally and figuratively, to cultural conversations that he entered as a young man and has never left. The biography of Samuel L. Jackson is not a closed text. The record he holds for all-time box office is the kind of number that journalists cite as a final statement, a way of putting a bow on a career. He has not put the bow on. He is still accumulating the material that whoever writes the definitive account of his work will eventually have to organize. That person will have more to work with than anyone writing today, because the story is still producing itself, scene by scene, choice by choice, in the ongoing and unfinished present tense of a career that has already been extraordinary and has not yet decided to stop.